Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're hearing the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any section using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Cognitive mechanisms influencing discourse. In discourse analysis, understanding the role of cognitive mechanisms like attention, perception, and cognitive biases is crucial for comprehending how individuals engage with, interpret, and react to communication. These cognitive functions act as filters through which information is processed, influencing the effectiveness and nuances of interaction within various discursive contexts. This exploration delves into how attention and perception direct the engagement with discourse and how cognitive biases can shape the interpretation and production of discourse, providing a comprehensive look at the cognitive underpinnings that influence our interactions with textual and spoken communication. 1. Attention and perception in discourse engagement. Cognitive mechanisms like attention and perception are pivotal in shaping how individuals engage with and process discourse. These mechanisms act as filters and guides, determining what information is noticed, how it is interpreted, and which parts are integrated into our cognitive framework during discourse interaction. Their roles are particularly crucial given the vast amount of information and stimuli that individuals encounter in any communicative setting. 1. Attention in discourse engagement. Attention is the cognitive process of selectively concentrating on one aspect of the environment while ignoring other things. In the context of discourse, attention determines which elements of the discourse are processed and how deeply they are analyzed. Selective attention. This refers to the focus on specific stimuli within a discourse, such as key words, phrases, or concepts that are relevant to the listener's or reader's goals, interests, or expectations. Selective attention influences comprehension by filtering out less relevant information and prioritizing what aligns with the individual's objectives or the task at hand. Divided attention. In situations where individuals are exposed to multiple sources of information or competing stimuli, e.g., multitasking while listening to a lecture, divided attention can significantly impact discourse processing. The capacity to effectively divide attention can vary among individuals, often leading to variations in how well discourse is understood and retained. Sustained attention. The ability to maintain focus on a discourse over time is essential for following extended arguments, narratives, or explanations. Sustained attention is challenged by factors such as the complexity and length of the discourse, as well as the listener's or reader's cognitive resources and interest in the topic. 2. Perception in discourse engagement. Perception involves the organization, identification, and interpretation of sensory information to understand the environment. In discourse engagement, perception plays a critical role in how linguistic and paralinguistic cues are decoded and understood. Auditory and visual perception. The initial processing of spoken or written discourse involves auditory or visual perception, respectively. How words and sentences are perceived, such as the speaker's intonation, speech rate, or the font and layout of written text, can influence comprehension and interpretation. Perceptual organization. When engaging with discourse, individuals use perceptual organization to group linguistic elements into meaningful units. This includes recognizing patterns, such as the structure of sentences, paragraphs, or narrative sequences, which facilitates understanding and memory of the discourse. Perceptual constancy. This mechanism allows individuals to recognize linguistic elements as being the same in varied contexts or presentations. For example, understanding that a spoken word represents the same concept as its written form, despite differences in modality, is crucial for cross-modal discourse processing. 3. Implications for discourse interaction. The interplay of attention and perception in discourse engagement has significant implications. Influences on comprehension and recall. The mechanisms of attention and perception directly affect what is understood from a discourse and how much is remembered. Factors that enhance or impair attention and perception can, therefore, significantly impact the effectiveness of communication. Adaptation of discourse strategies. Awareness of how attention and perception influence discourse processing can inform the strategies used by speakers and writers to capture and maintain their audience's engagement, such as utilizing attention-grabbing techniques or designing written materials for easy perception and comprehension.
Cross-cultural and individual differences. Variations in attentional and perceptual processing across cultures and individuals underscore the importance of considering these cognitive mechanisms when analyzing discourse interactions in diverse settings. Tailoring discourse to accommodate these differences can enhance understanding and communication effectiveness. Understanding the cognitive mechanisms of attention and perception sheds light on the complex processes underlying discourse engagement, offering insights into how individuals process, interpret, and interact with linguistic information. Recognizing these mechanisms' roles enables a deeper appreciation of the challenges and strategies involved in effective discourse communication. 2. Cognitive biases in discourse interpretation. Cognitive biases, the systematic patterns of deviation from norm or rationality in judgment, profoundly influence the interpretation and production of discourse. These biases operate at a subconscious level, affecting how information is processed, interpreted, and remembered. In the realm of discourse, cognitive biases can shape both what is communicated and how it is received, often leading to distortions in understanding, selective interpretation, and even miscommunication. Below, we explore several key ways in which cognitive biases impact discourse interpretation and production. 1. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. In discourse interpretation, individuals may selectively focus on aspects of a discourse that align with their existing beliefs, while disregarding or minimizing information that contradicts them. This bias can lead to skewed interpretations of what is communicated. Production. When producing discourse, individuals might selectively present information that supports their viewpoint, ignoring or downplaying counter-arguments or alternative perspectives. 2. Availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut that relies on immediate examples that come to a person's mind when evaluating a specific topic, concept, method, or decision. In discourse interpretation, this bias can lead individuals to overestimate the importance or frequency of information they have recently encountered or that is vivid and emotionally charged, impacting their interpretation of new discourse. Production. Speakers or writers may overemphasize examples or evidence that are most readily available to them, potentially skewing the content toward more recent or salient issues rather than providing a balanced overview. 3. Anchoring bias. Anchoring bias occurs when individuals rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, when making decisions. In the context of discourse interpretation, the initial information presented in a discourse can disproportionately influence how subsequent information is interpreted, potentially leading to a biased understanding of the overall message. Production. In discourse production, the choice of starting points or initial arguments can significantly influence the direction of the discourse and how it is received by the audience. 4. Framing effect. The framing effect refers to people's reactions to a particular choice or concept based on how it is framed or presented. In discourse interpretation, the way information is framed can greatly affect its interpretation. For instance, information presented as a loss versus a gain can lead to different emotional reactions and interpretations, even if the underlying facts are the same. Production. Discourse producers can manipulate framing to influence the audience's perception, emphasizing certain aspects over others to elicit desired reactions or interpretations. 5. In-group bias. In-group bias is the tendency to favor one's own group. In discourse interpretation, individuals may interpret discourse in ways that favor their social or cultural group, leading to biased perceptions of outgroup members or perspectives. Production. Speakers or writers may produce discourse that favors their in-group,
either by explicitly praising the in-group or by implicitly devaluing outgroups. 6. Impact on discourse. The influence of cognitive biases in discourse interpretation and production has far-reaching implications, affecting not only interpersonal communication but also public discourse, media, and political communication. Recognizing these biases is the first step toward mitigating their effects, fostering more balanced and effective communication. Strategies to counteract biases include seeking out diverse perspectives, questioning initial assumptions, and engaging in critical thinking and self-reflection. In a world where discourse shapes realities, understanding and addressing cognitive biases is crucial for clearer communication and better mutual understanding. 3. Conceptual metaphors and cognitive framing in discourse. Conceptual metaphors and cognitive framing represent two pivotal elements in the cognitive approach to discourse analysis, offering profound insights into how meaning is constructed, communicated, and interpreted. These concepts elucidate the underlying cognitive structures that shape our understanding of abstract concepts, influence our perception of events, and guide our linguistic expressions. 1. Conceptual metaphors. Conceptual metaphors refer to the understanding of one idea or conceptual domain in terms of another. This cognitive mechanism underlies much of our everyday language and thought, allowing us to grasp complex or abstract concepts by relating them to more familiar, concrete experiences. George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, in their seminal work, Metaphors We Live By, argue that such metaphors are not merely linguistic flourishes but fundamental to our conceptual system. Influence on meaning construction. Conceptual metaphors shape the way we construct meaning by mapping characteristics from a source domain, typically concrete and well understood, onto a target domain, often abstract or complex. For example, when we talk about wading through a difficult text, the metaphor equates understanding complex information with navigating through challenging physical terrain, framing our experience of comprehension in terms of physical movement. Implications for discourse. The use of conceptual metaphors in discourse influences how information is processed and understood. Metaphors can highlight certain aspects of a concept while downplaying others, effectively guiding the listener's or reader's attention and shaping their perceptions and attitudes. 2. Cognitive framing. Cognitive framing involves the mental structures that shape how individuals perceive and organize the world. Frames are cognitive shortcuts that help us interpret and make sense of complex realities by filtering information through pre-existing conceptions. In discourse, framing refers to the way information is presented to shape interpretations and reactions. Role in discourse interpretation. Frames operate by emphasizing certain aspects of reality while omitting or de-emphasizing others, thus shaping the interpretation of discourse. For instance, framing a political issue as a crisis versus a challenge can lead to very different emotional responses and judgments about the severity and appropriate course of action. Effect on discourse production. In producing discourse, the choice of frames is a powerful tool for influencing public opinion, decision-making, and behavior. By framing discourse in a particular way, speakers and writers can predispose audiences to view issues through a specific lens, effectively guiding conclusions and reactions. 3. Interaction of conceptual metaphors and cognitive framing. The interplay between conceptual metaphors and cognitive framing in discourse analysis highlights the dynamic ways in which language and cognition interact to construct meaning. Conceptual metaphors provide the cognitive basis for certain frames, grounding abstract ideas in concrete experiences and thereby influencing which frames are likely to be activated in discourse. Together, they contribute to a circular process where metaphors shape frames, and frames influence the selection and interpretation of metaphors. 4. Implications for discourse analysis. Understanding the roles of conceptual metaphors and cognitive framing enriches discourse analysis by revealing underlying cognitive processes. Analyzing the metaphors and frames used in discourse unveils the cognitive processes underlying how individuals conceptualize the world and communicate about it. Highlighting ideological orientations.
The analysis of metaphors and frames can expose the ideological underpinnings of discourse, revealing how language is used to construct and propagate particular worldviews.
Guiding effective communication. Insights into how metaphors and frames shape meaning can inform strategies for more effective communication, allowing for the design of discourse that resonates with intended audiences and achieves desired outcomes. In sum, the exploration of conceptual metaphors and cognitive framing in discourse analysis provides critical insights into the cognitive underpinnings of language use, offering a nuanced understanding of how meaning is constructed, conveyed, and interpreted in communication. Conclusion. The intricate dance between attention, perception, and cognitive biases plays a pivotal role in shaping discourse engagement and interpretation. Attention determines what parts of a discourse are focused on and processed, while perception helps organize and interpret incoming information, making these cognitive processes fundamental to effective communication. Furthermore, cognitive biases such as confirmation bias, the availability heuristic, and anchoring can deeply influence how discourse is both produced and received, often skewing comprehension and leading to miscommunication.
Understanding these cognitive aspects is essential for analyzing discourse effectively, as it highlights the underlying psychological processes that contribute to the complex dynamics of communication. By examining these elements, discourse analysts can gain richer insights into the motivations, misunderstandings, and mechanisms that drive human communication, ultimately enhancing our ability to navigate and construct meaningful discourse in social and professional contexts. Frequently asked questions. How do attention and perception influence discourse engagement? Attention and perception are critical cognitive mechanisms that filter and guide how we engage with discourse. Attention determines what information we focus on and process, while perception helps us organize and interpret this information. Together, they influence what we notice, how we interpret discourse, and which parts we integrate into our cognitive framework. What are the types of attention involved in discourse engagement? The types of attention include selective attention, focusing on specific stimuli that align with our goals or interests, divided attention, managing multiple sources of information, and sustained attention, maintaining focus over time. Each plays a role in how we process and understand discourse. How does perception affect our understanding of discourse? Perception involves organizing, identifying, and interpreting sensory information, which is crucial in understanding spoken or written discourse. It affects how we decode linguistic and paralinguistic cues, group elements into meaningful units, and maintain consistency across different contexts or presentations. What impact do cognitive biases have on discourse interpretation and production? Cognitive biases can lead to distortions in understanding, selective interpretation, and miscommunication. They influence both what is communicated and how it is received by affecting how information is processed, interpreted, and remembered. Can you explain some common cognitive biases in discourse? Common cognitive biases include confirmation bias, favoring information that aligns with existing beliefs, availability heuristic, relying on immediately available examples, anchoring bias, over-relying on initial information, framing effect, being influenced by how information is presented, and in-group bias, favoring one's own group. How do conceptual metaphors influence discourse? Conceptual metaphors help us understand complex or abstract concepts by relating them to more familiar, concrete experiences. They shape the way we construct meaning by mapping characteristics from a well-understood domain onto a more abstract or complex one, thereby influencing how information is processed and understood in discourse. What role does cognitive framing play in discourse? Cognitive framing shapes how individuals perceive and organize information, emphasizing certain aspects while omitting others. In discourse, framing affects interpretation by guiding how information is presented and received, influencing emotional responses, judgments, and behaviors. How do conceptual metaphors and cognitive framing interact in discourse analysis? Conceptual metaphors and cognitive framing interact dynamically, with metaphors providing a cognitive basis for certain frames and influencing which frames are likely to be activated in discourse.
This interplay shapes how meaning is constructed and interpreted, revealing the cognitive underpinnings of language use. Why is understanding cognitive mechanisms important in discourse analysis? Understanding cognitive mechanisms like attention, perception, cognitive biases, conceptual metaphors, and cognitive framing is crucial because they deeply influence how we process, interpret, and interact with discourse. Recognizing their roles enables more effective communication and helps mitigate biases, leading to better understanding and engagement in communicative interactions. How can knowledge of cognitive mechanisms in discourse be applied? Knowledge of these mechanisms can inform strategies to capture and maintain audience engagement, design discourse for easy comprehension, and tailor communication to diverse settings and individuals. It also highlights the importance of considering these cognitive aspects when analyzing discourse interactions, facilitating more nuanced and inclusive practices.